California Voting Rights Act, criteria for drafting maps, a presentation by legal counsel and demographer. I will open this hearing at 9:16 p.m. and I will read the following statement. There is none of that. I'm going to read the statement word for word that was provided to us by legal counsel. I will remind everyone that what was on the agenda tonight, and anytime this item shows up on the agenda, the entire packet for every document that has been provided to this issue will be attached and is available on the district website. Sorry for the redundance, but even the documents that are included tonight will be posted again and again and again until we go through this. Here is my statement. Good evening, everyone. I would never say that, Ron. Welcome to the Acton-Agua Dulce Unified School District's first public hearing on the criteria to be used for drafting trustee area maps under the California Voting Rights Act, or CVRA as it is commonly known. The purpose of this evening's public hearing is to receive input from the public on criteria used to be used for the maps of the 5 trustee areas that will be drawn by the demographer. Although the criteria are very specific in state law to some degree, the public's input on criteria will be very helpful. After tonight's hearing, there will be a second public hearing on October 24th to discuss the criteria as well. Before I turn the podium over to our legal counsel, Ronald Wenkart, to introduce our demographer, Justin Levitt, I'm going to mention a few major points. The CVRA is a state law which prohibits at-large voting systems that impair the ability of racial or ethnic minorities to elect the candidate of their choice. The CVRA favors district-based election systems in which candidates must reside in a trustee area, and only the voters residing in that trustee area vote for those candidates. To avoid the potential for litigation and the cost of attorney fees, the board has decided to modify the current election system and establish a district-based system for the 2026 election. That means that beginning in 2026, voters in those trustee areas up for election in 2026 will vote for one candidate in their trustee area, and the remaining trustees will hold an election in 2028. The charge in the election system will not affect the 2024 election or school attendance boundaries. I'm now going to turn over the podium to our legal counsel to introduce our demographer and provide us with additional information, followed by public input. Ron.
Board President Paulsgraf, thank you for that introduction. It's very much appreciated. My name is Ronald Wenkart. I'm the legal counsel for the school district in the CVRA matter. I'm going to introduce Justin Levitt. This will be his first time meeting with the board. He's vice president of the National Demographics Corporation. In the past 6 years that I've been with the firm and have worked on CVRA matters, I've worked closely with Justin and NDC. Justin has been with NDC for 20 years now. He's worked with a number of jurisdictions with me in LA County and Orange County. He's also worked with several local districts here, the Lancaster School District and Westside School District. So with that, I'm going to introduce Justin, who's going to do a PowerPoint presentation, which will summarize the CVRA, the impact of the CVRA, districting rules and goals, key demographics of the district, and then we will request board and community input. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board and members of the community. Forgive me if I'm a bit rusty. This is my first public hearing I've been done since May. I think we've had a little bit of a break in this because of the election, but we're actually seeing these challenges start to ramp up again. So it's a pleasure to be with you tonight, although I know very few of these districts going through this process are doing so by choice. And so on that note, if we go to the next slide, I just want to kind of talk through, I know I said a lot of this in your introduction, but just to really emphasize that what this is really about is the method of electing the Board of Trustees. As part of this process, we're not changing any attendance areas. We're not changing the board's financial responsibility to the district as a whole, to all residents and all voters of the district. And all members of the board will continue to serve all residents of the district. This is really for the purposes of election. Most jurisdictions in California have traditionally elected at large, where all residents of the district have been able to vote for all the representatives on the board. And what the CVRA was written to encourage was this by trustee area system, where we divide the district into equally populated areas called trustee areas for school districts. And only the people within that trustee area get to vote for a representative who serves the voters in that area principally. So if we look at the CVRA itself on the next slide, basically the CVRA was a law that was written to make it easier to force jurisdictions to make this change. It makes the US does have a Federal Voting Rights Act. This actually removes 2 of the 4 tests under the Federal Voting Rights Act for determining whether or not there's a potential for racially polarized voting or racial discrimination. And it makes it easier for plaintiffs to come in and target jurisdictions. And if we go to the next slide, just to review some of the impact of the California Voting Rights Act, statewide, we have seen this massive change over the last decade and a half. We've now seen over 240 school districts, in addition to over now 200 cities as well. I know that slide says 160, it's now up to about 200. As well as other local districts such as water districts, healthcare districts, fire protection districts, airport districts, sanitary districts, and all sorts of special districts have also been targeted by this California Voting Rights Act. And the reason we see this is the way the law is written is that if a plaintiff wins a case in court, they get their fees, they get all their expenses. But if a jurisdiction wins, the best they can get is they don't have to switch to districts. They don't get reimbursed for any of the expenses that they've incurred in going through the lawsuit. And we can see some of the payouts that over the years to some of this major cities like Modesto, Anaheim, as well as smaller jurisdictions. The Tulare County Hospital District is a small healthcare district that just serves the city of Tulare up in the Central Valley. And we see some of the payments are well into the 6 or 7 figures. And to date, every lawsuit against the CVRA, most of them, other than the Santa Monica case, have not made it out of trial court. And so on the merits, every jurisdiction that has been sued has been found liable under the California Voting Rights Act. While the Santa Monica case remains in the court system, the most recent action was not over whether or not the CVRA would continue to exist, but what the standard of the CVRA would be. And I would say Santa Monica is already in it for over $20 million of their own expenses, money that they could not get back even if they prevail at the end of the day. And so because of that, all of these jurisdictions have moved to the California Voting Rights Act. And if we go to the next slide, the state actually sets out a process for making the transition within a certain time frame. And so these are our dates that we had as, when we were putting this together, and I can fill in the TBA as I talk about this timeline. 2 initial hearings are required to discuss the criteria, the background, and some of the demographic numbers that we'll get into in the following slides. These hearings, we don't have any maps. We're just here to listen to testimony on communities of interest, on the process, and hear from residents about where they would like lines to be drawn. As part of this, next Tuesday, we'll also be doing a community forum at 4 p.m. And then on the week after that, at our next regular board meeting on the 24th, we'll be doing the exact same presentation, same as today. Following that, we release the draft map. So by November 7th, the draft maps will be published online. And then following that, we'll have two hearings on the draft maps on the 14th of November and the 19th of December. At these hearings, the board will have an opportunity to review the maps, suggest changes, and eventually what we want to do is come to a map that can be adopted. Our goal for that is December 19th. As part of this stage of the process, we also have another community workshop scheduled for, I believe, for November 16th, but certainly in November. Community forum, November 20th. So again, that'll be with the draft maps. That'll be an opportunity for members of the community to come in on our virtual meeting in Zoom and look at the maps and provide feedback to us as well and to the board. Ultimately, the board's selection of a map on December 19th will go in front of the County Committee on School District Organization. That's the body that has to review any changes that school districts make to boundaries, election changes, and so on. They'll come up here and do one hearing within the district, generally followed by a formal approval at one of their regular board meetings. And that'll be probably in early 2025. We anticipate January or February for that. So that lays out the basic process. If we go to the next slide, we're getting into the criteria here. The state also sets out a set of rules that jurisdictions have to follow when drawing lines. And we divide them into 3 columns based on where they come from. And in that first column on the left, federal laws are things that apply to all jurisdictions anywhere in the country, from state redistricting down to our school district redistricting or drawing districts. And first and foremost is equal population. This is the idea that districts or trustee areas have to have more or less the same number of residents. We take that total population count from the 2020 census, divide that by 5 to get our ideal population, and each district has to remain fairly close to that number. We are allowed a maximum difference of 10% between the largest and smallest districts. And I'll give you some numbers on the next couple slides when we look at that in more detail. We also then have to look at the Federal Voting Rights Act. While race and ethnicity cannot be the only factor or the predominant factor in the creation of a district or trustee area, no racial gerrymandering, it does have to be one factor of many that we look at, especially as we consider communities of interest and neighborhoods. And that really brings us to the middle column. The middle column are a new set of rules that took effect January of this year called the Fair Maps Act. And these are prioritized in this order. First, geographic contiguity is the principle that all parts of a district have to touch each other. You can't have a little bit of the district of a trustee area at one end, the northeast side of it, another bit at the southeast or southwest side that have no physical connection or link to each other. Some people like to say it, it's the idea you have to be able to walk or drive from one part of a trustee area to all other parts of that trustee area without leaving the trustee area. Second is avoiding neighborhoods and a division of neighborhoods and communities of interest. This is really where the heart of the redistricting process or drawing districting process really lies, because what we're looking for is to keep areas that, as the law says, areas with socioeconomic or geographic similarities should be kept together for the purpose of their fair and effective representation. So if we identify specific communities, particularly communities smaller than the population of a trustee area, we need to work to keep those communities specifically together in our final map. If we have larger communities that make up more than one trustee area, what's the best way to divide that? What's the best natural division within a specific neighborhood or community? Third, avoiding division of cities and census designated places. This is the idea that we need to keep our neighborhoods or formally recognized communities whole. Both Acton and Agua Dulce are recognized communities by LA County and by the census. And so we'll try to strive to minimize divisions of that. However, as we see, these are rank ordered. So if there is a neighborhood that spans the two communities or goes into other smaller communities, we should try to keep that community link together first, in that order of priority. Fourth, easily identifiable boundaries is the principle that it should be easy for voters to understand which trustee area they live in. So to the extent that we can use major roads and other natural or man-made features rather than just jogging through a small neighborhood, or maybe, a small cul-de-sac with each side of the cul-de-sac in two different trustee areas, we should try to do that. And then finally, compactness. And the law specifically defines compactness as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people, which is really aimed at hooks and fingers, cutouts designed to get to a particular house or particular community. But I will say that, again, these are rank ordered. So if that new neighborhood boundary, if that community boundary does have a natural hook or finger because that's where the road goes, and we want to keep all the homes along the road in one area, that's what we would strive to do first. And that's a real issue a lot of times in communities where you have roads that kind of branch out from a major road and go down into the mountains, for example. The law also includes a prohibition in the third column that you shall not adopt areas that favor or discriminate against an incumbent political candidate or political party. And that basically expands what the law had previously said, talked about partisanship previously, just to make it clear that we're drawing these kind of blind to where people live or where people might run from. And then third, other traditional districting principles. If we anticipate that there's going to be some population change over the next 10 years, especially significant population change, then we can take that into consideration within our deviation of 10%. So these are some basic redistricting principles that the state requires we look at. And I think as we look at different maps through the process, we'll talk about these in more detail. But I want to turn now to the numbers. If we go to the next slide, looking at our total population, the census recorded 12,265 residents in the Acton-Agua Dulce Unified School District. Of that population, 64% were non-Hispanic white, 28% were Hispanic or Latino. And we're using the total population here, numbers here. So the demographics of the schools may actually look different than our total population. In fact, they will look different than our citizen voting age population. That's the population over the age of 18 with US citizenship. The courts refer to citizen voting age population as the eligible voter population. And for the Federal Voting Rights Act, the citizen voting age number is what we look at when we look at the need to draw districts that represent protected classes. And of that population, about a quarter, 24% are Latino, 70% non-Hispanic white, and a small remainder African-American and Asian. If we will go to the next slide, we look at some of this. We also have more information that would be available to the community as part of this process. For example, we can show breakdowns of where do we see families with children at home? Where do we see different languages spoken at home? Where do we see different income brackets or different housing, single and multifamily housing? The purpose of a lot of this is to provide some numbers that may help us get at communities of interest. Obviously, it's no substitute for your local knowledge of the community, but we do want to include information that might be useful to look at communities of interest. Now, just we have this note here, and I want to come back to this. 12,600, what's the exact number? 2,265 people was the exact population. That's the number we divide by 5 to get each trustee area a population of 2,453. Now, I don't anticipate any of the trustee areas will be perfectly at that number because we're dealing with census blocks, which have different populations. We need to stay within a small margin of that. In fact, really, if we have about 245 people difference between the largest and smallest, we'll stay within that 10% deviation. And so all of the maps will show you will meet that requirement. If we go to the next slide, we can look at some of these numbers on a map, and for our voting rights analysis, we don't really see a specific concentration of Latino residents anywhere within the district. The areas that are in the purples and blues are under 25 or 35% Latino. The areas in yellow and red are over 65 or 75%. But especially as we look at a rural area, the size of these areas are misleading. That big yellow area we see kind of in the southwest part of the district only has about 20 residents in that block. It's very large because it takes into account a very large area. And so sometimes it can look like, oh, this pink block looks very big, but there's only one resident in there, and that resident happens to be Latino, so therefore it's 100% Latino. So when we look at this analysis, we're not just looking at the size of the area, we're looking at the population, and where we see the denser populations. And what we don't see in this map is a whole side of the district that's in pink or yellow and a whole side that's not. That's what we'd be looking for that concentration. Go to the next slide. This really means that for our process, we're looking at this neighborhoods and communities of interest as our central idea. Now, we're going to come to you with several different draft maps. You know, our process is we don't present just one option and say, what do you like or dislike about it? Because looking at one map really makes it hard to see what the options are. So we like to come with 3 or 4 maps to present different ways of drawing the lines within school district. And what we're trying to look at, especially as we are trying to define where these lines should maybe start, is what are your neighborhoods? And I like to think of neighborhoods as the smallest kinds of building blocks that we use to build up trustee areas. So there are really areas that are geographically defined. That's really important for us. Along a particular street, around a particular feature, share a particular homeowners association or community association, or maybe pay into a specific district or street lighting or cemetery or other area. And so those are some examples of some physical features that really help us define the smallest units of our trustee areas. And the more we get into the geography, the more helpful it is, because if you say, well, don't put a line down First Street, that's much easier than to understand where it is. Then it's like, keep the Main Street community together, where people might have different ideas of what constitutes that Main Street community. So the more specific we get, generally the easier it is to make sure we're keeping neighborhoods together. And so if you don't know tonight, it's something to really think about for future meetings as well. We go to the next slide. Communities of interest are defined in law as areas that share a social or economic interest that should be kept together within a single district for the purpose of its effective and fair representation. This is the way that our building blocks start to come together to form shared issue or shared communities. Issues or communities that share issues, communities that share problems, communities that share concerns. And so we list a few different ideas of what those shared interests may be. Really, we're looking not for things that include like the partisan or political connection, but things that relate to everyone's day-to-day life, the traffic along a particular road, the issues maybe with buses or getting kids to school from a particular part of the area. That may be as simple as, the bus route that serves a particular part of the community has issues that the bus route serving a different part of the community does not have. And I'm keeping it vague here because every jurisdiction I go to has a different set of issues and communities that we look at, we find over the course of the process. If we go to the next slide, just some examples of some economic measures or percentage households with a child at home. These are some things we get from the Census Bureau that help us maybe look at our communities in a new way. We will have an interactive web viewer where you can view some of these online as well. If you would like to study some of our numbers in more detail, there's certainly no substitute for the real knowledge of the community that you'll bring. And then if we go to the last slide, really, these first two hearings where we don't have any draft maps yet are aimed at getting at those communities of interest that we've been talking about through the presentation. So the more specifics we have, the easier and the better it is for the process. I'm also happy to answer any other questions you have about the districting process or anything to do with upcoming events or upcoming steps. So thank you very much for your time.